What's up, everybody? I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me once again on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host once again. Today, Wednesday, I usually like to have guests on Sundays, usually like to have guests on Wednesdays, but more often than not, the guests usually join me on Sundays. I'm going to have a very good guest on the show on Sunday, Tom Wujek of Blue and Gold Sabres Mafia, a fast-growing Facebook group that I've really enjoyed being a part of. He's talked about a lot of very interesting topics in One Buffalo, New York, pertaining to the Buffalo Sabres on and off the ice. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things in regards to the Buffalo Sabres on and off the ice on Sunday, probably around 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So tune into that. You can expect that live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel, as well as, next Wednesday, next week, I will be having a Buffalo Bills writer on the podcast, as well as Dylan Trinado, good buddy of mine who is starting a new podcast. He's going to talk about that. It is not just a new podcast, it is a soccer podcast, which I'm very interested in that. I've actually been a closet soccer fan for the better part of the last 15 years. I played soccer. I enjoyed playing soccer. It was a fun sport. It was a decent goalie back in the day once upon a time. So I'm going to talk to Dylan next week, try to iron that out, try to iron the details out on that. But you can tune into his podcast. I believe he's putting it on iTunes. It is going to be called The Hat Trick Podcast, I'm pretty sure. Hopefully I'm not botching the name on that, but Dylan Davis Trinado, I'm very, very, very happy to get him on. One of my MFST buddies from the My Fantasy Sports Talk side of things. I believe it's actually going to be the first time I've ever had a colleague from My Fantasy Sports Talk on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I've tried to get Dan Schalk on. He can't handle the heat. I've tried to get Brandon Reed on. I think he's just so busy with the My Fantasy podcast and doing all the crazy production stuff that he's doing, in his home state there. I think of Arkansas or Tennessee. I think it's Tennessee. I can't remember. But very excited to have Dylan on. I think he's going to be great. I think he's very excited for his podcast, and he should be. This was one of the best decisions that I've ever made, starting this podcast, and I think Dylan will really have the drive and the determination to put together something really, really cool. So good luck to Dylan on that, and I hope to have him join me. Tom will be joining me on Sunday, Dylan probably next Wednesday, next week, as that will be the time frame for the Thomas Takes. Sundays at 7, Wednesdays probably around 2 o'clock. I like to try to get the afternoon side of things, and Sunday nights will obviously be penciled in for the Buffalo Bills post-game shows, which will be starting, obviously, once football season starts. So I'll be very excited for those. The people really, really responded to those. That really helped my show, get bigger, to say the least. I mean, I got the attention of a lot of really, really cool people that I never thought I'd have the chance to talk to over the phone or meet face-to-face due to those shows. Thousands of people watching those shows, as many as 10, 15,000 people. So very, very thankful for those shows, and I can't wait to bring those back. So let's talk about the subject matter as I spent about 4 minutes introducing myself and all that fun stuff. So the subject matter is, who do I believe is the next UFC Middleweight title contender? The last UFC event, Robert Whittaker faced Yoel Romero for the UFC Middleweight strap. Whittaker won the title, controversial decision, but to say the least, I had my reasons as to why Whittaker won that fight. Most of them I would deem to be conspiracy reasons. Being that Yoel Romero did not make weight would have been a terrible, terrible instance for Yoel Romero to make weight and to win that fight. I honestly think the judges looked at that fight and said, well, if Whittaker wins in a split decision, it's debatable who won, but he made the weight, so we're just going to give it to him. I don't think the judges have integrity. I really don't. To touch on that again, I really don't think the judges have any integrity. They are not competent, to say the least, in MMA, and I hope that changes at some point soon. But currently, right now, if you look at the UFC middleweight rankings, it's pretty murky waters. Yoel Romero has lost two fights to Robert Whittaker, and 2 of his last 3 fights, his last 2 losses are to Robert Whittaker. So I think Yoel Romero is out for the time being in terms of getting an immediate rematch. I hope not to see that. I don't want to see that. That fight with Whittaker and Romero did not, quote unquote, move the needle. In Dana White's famous words in regards to Nate Diaz not moving the needle, 2 guys that are safe to say that did not move the needle are Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero. So Whittaker needs a new challenger. Whittaker needs somebody that people know. Whittaker needs somebody that will add to his name if he's able to beat him. Whittaker needs to fight somebody that, realistically has some shine. And the 2 names that come to mind that are really being debated among MMA fans and UFC fans around the world are Chris Weidman and Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum's coming off a win over Michael Bisping in Shanghai, and he fought Jacare Souza. He's coming off 2 very big wins versus Jacare versus Bisping. Weidman is coming off a win over Gastelum. So if that doesn't tell you anything, that would allude to the fact that Chris Weidman hasn't fought in quite a long time, and Kelvin Gastelum's last loss was to Weidman, but he's rebounded with 2 big wins over 2 guys that Chris Weidman never fought, in Michael Bisping and Jacare Souza. So we have a real debate on our hands as to who deserves the next title shot. And nowadays, in mixed martial arts, the meaning of that, who deserves the next title shot, it can go down so many different roads. And as I alluded to one of those roads, Robert Whittaker needs to fight someone that will elevate his name. Granted, Kelvin Gastelum's coming off of 2 big wins, 1 versus Michael Bisping, 1 versus Jacare Souza. But if Robert Whittaker is standing across the cage from a former world champion in Chris Weidman, furthermore, a former world champion that defeated Anderson Silva not once but twice, you can look at the first fight as Anderson Silva got cocky. Weidman dropped him. If Anderson had taken the fight seriously, woulda, coulda, shoulda, ifs, ands, or buts, that fight happened and Anderson didn't take the fight seriously, and he deserved to lose. The second fight, Anderson Silva was dropped. He was getting smashed on the ground. I thought Weidman had a realistic shot at finishing him via ground and pound. The fight, the round ended in round 1. Round 2, Anderson Silva throws a leg kick. Weidman checks it. It catches Weidman's knee. Anderson shatters his leg, and that's all she wrote to that rivalry. Then Weidman fought Lyoto Machida and won. Then Weidman fought Luke Rockhold, who obviously went down the road of fighting Bisping, and that is why we are in the situation that we are in. Without Bisping beating Luke Rockhold, we're not even talking about any of this. But Weidman had an undefeated record heading into his fight with Luke Rockhold, was an undefeated champion, and lost to Luke Rockhold, lost to Yoel Romero. And realistically, I thought the loss, quote-unquote loss, to Gegard Mousasi was a little bit ridiculous. That was a just botched situation. And let's just say for the sake of it, would he maybe have gone on to lose that fight? Who knows? We don't know when a fight ends like that with very, very controversial circumstances in a very controversial fashion, where Weidman had his hands down on the mat, Mousasi throws that knee and lifts his hands up off the mat. That is a legal knee. But that rule was botched by the New York State Athletic Commission, botched by Dan Miragliotta, who was the referee for that fight in the co-main event at UFC 210, mind you, in Buffalo. So I was there and I watched it, and I was just like, wow, this is really controversial. So, in my opinion, being inactive for as long as Chris Weidman has been, that is my reasoning for why he should not get the title shot. But at the same time, head-to-head, Weidman's last win was against Kelvin Gastelum. And it wasn't just a win, he finished Kelvin Gastelum. Furthermore, Kelvin Gastelum is fighting in the wrong weight class. Realistically should be fighting at welterweight, but has, once again, the inability to make weight at his natural weight class. Does that sound familiar? Yo Romero has the exact same problem, and that's the last guy that Robert Whittaker fought. The last thing I want, if I am in the UFC brass, is to chance Robert Whittaker fighting someone that has shown the inability to make weight. Chris Weidman has never missed weight. Chris Weidman has always been the consummate professional when he is willing, able, and ready to fight. Ready, willing, and able to fight, I should say. He's always made weight, has always been a professional, has always stayed on top of things when he is healthy. He had a very unfortunate injury to his thumb that looks like he is 100%. I personally believe that regardless of inactivity, when you do the head-to-head math, if you want a pay-per-view that really actually moves the needle, Chris Weidman's wins over Anderson Silva still hold weight in this landscape of MMA. People know who Chris Weidman is. I'm not saying that Kelvin Gastelum's the most unpopular fighter, but his last fight was a co-main event to Amanda Nunes and Raquel Pennington. His fight before that was on UFC Fight Pass versus Michael Bisping. His fight originally at that event was supposed to be against Anderson Silva. Now, if you do MMA math, I thought Anderson Silva would actually have a very good shot at beating Kelvin Gastelum. I think he matches up really well with Kelvin Gastelum. But Chris Weidman, for whatever reason, was a horrible matchup for Anderson Silva. A horrible matchup. Prior to the hand fighting and all the weird stuff he was doing in the first fight, Chris Weidman was pushing the action. Chris Weidman was pushing the pace of that fight. And I think no matter what way you cut it, Chris Weidman would beat Anderson Silva. This current Anderson Silva. Maybe, obviously not Anderson in his prime, but this Anderson Silva 100%. So to me, if I'm picking, more so based on the fact that Kelvin Gastelum has shown an inability to make weight, I would never, ever put Robert Whittaker, this shiny new champion that you have at middleweight, who is damn impressive, tough as nails, can punch, can kick, can wrestle, has great takedown defense, can knee, can clinch. He's the real deal. He's a young gun, young stud. I would not risk putting this champion in another title fight versus a fighter that can't make weight. You have Whittaker on the shelf with this thumb injury. You have Weidman coming back from a thumb injury. You make that fight at a later date this year and call it a day. That way the fans and MMA know what's next, for that division. They know what to expect, as will Whittaker and Weidman. They will both know what to expect, what's to come, and go from there. I really think that's the next logical step. A win over Chris Weidman would do wonders for Robert Whittaker. It would be a win against a true middleweight. It would be a win against a former champion. And it would be a win over someone that the MMA community knows. A win for Weidman over Whittaker, which is very possible, gets him the UFC middleweight belt back, which realistically fell out of his grasp to Luke Rockhold and fell out of his grasp due to an injury prior to fighting Luke Rockhold in an immediate rematch, which he was given, an immediate rematch. He gets injured, Michael Bisping steps in, and Luke Rockhold loses to Michael Bisping. Fight that should have happened shortly thereafter was Bisping versus Weidman, but Weidman was hurt. The only enemy in Weidman's career is himself. He lost the fight to Yo Romero. He was winning that fight. Shot a lazy single leg takedown, left his head completely open for Yoel Romero to throw a flying knee and knock him unconscious. His bout versus Gegard Mousasi, very, very questionable outcome of that fight. Probably should have been ruled a no contest. Probably should have been a disqualification loss for Mousasi based upon the way the NYSAC handled it. But if you're asking me who's the next UFC middleweight title contender, it has to be Chris Weidman. Kelvin Gastelum has proven once, twice, 3 times that he can't make weight. And that's that. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, everybody. I'll be right back to bring you another segment. Stay tuned.